Hi there everyone, and thank you for joining us on today's Cloud Thinking webinar. So today we're going to be talking about how you can save millions literally, and that will be moving data from a file server into the cloud server. So let's have a look at what we're going to be talking about today. So first of all, we're going to start off with some introductions. We'll then talk about the challenge of hosting data on a file server, and then we'll talk about the solution in moving it into a cloud hosted solution. Obviously, as always, we'll finish up with some questions at the end. So let's start with some introductions. So today I'm going to be joined by my colleague Michael Kira, who is our Partner Success Manager. You want to say hello, Michael?
Hello, everyone.
Thank you very much. So Mike's going to be joining us today to run through an actual live demonstration of how you can actually migrate from a file server into a cloud environment. So I'm Sam Winter. Thank you everyone for joining us again. So I'm the Inside Sales Manager here at CloudM, and I'll be leading the conversation as to around the challenges, the solution, and everything in between. So let's kick start. So obviously, hosting data on a file server does come with its challenges. First of all, you've got to look at the cost. Obviously, utilizing a cloud server is a lot more cost effective than creating your own internal file server. Now, I've got a slide, a couple more down the line, and we'll really get into that. I've got a bit of a use case where we can compare the costs together, and we will really dig into that for you. But you've also got to look at the maintenance, right? If you've got a local file server, it requires 24/7 maintenance, and with that comes a lot of slow adaptability. And again, if you look at a file server, tends to be a lot less secure than a large cloud provider. Now, due to the fact that obviously the likes of Google, Amazon, and Windows, and Microsoft, spend a lot more protecting their own environments than most businesses can. And we will dig into that as we get into it as well. As well as this, look, it's been the hot topic over 12 months now around the lockdown. So obviously people have been unable to get access into the office, which if you've got a local file server that can only be accessed in the office, can cause a few problems while you're not able to access your data from home. So following on from that, how can the cloud environment assist with all of this? So we'll look at the cost piece first. We see some companies saving over 90%. The next slide that I've got on here will showcase that for you. You look at this as well from a software point of view. Updates mean you just need to make a brew while it updates, right? And it kind of follows into the next point. So we're enabling tech teams. There's no more 24/7 server maintenance. If something's gone wrong, obviously your tech team would be all over it. In the Google environment, that's covered for you. And you look at the actual data, and it's stored when you look at Google, when you look at Microsoft, when you look at the likes of Amazon. They're all stored in military grade data centers, right? So the cost that they've included to get to a military grade standard is absolutely huge. So look, you might as well take advantage of that. And as well as that, just to touch on the working from home piece, data is accessible anywhere with an internet connection. You look at this from a Google perspective, their motto is work anywhere, anytime, on any device. And this really builds into the whole cloud environment. So if you look at the cost on screen right now, this is a use case that we got into with a customer who had a petabyte of data stored internally on a file server. They wanted to move that to a cloud storage, basically because of all the things that we've just talked about, right? Security, cost saving, and ease of access. So when you look at a file server internally, it's made up of a lot of costs that all bundle together. So you look at the actual hardware itself, the actual server, that's a big bulk of a cost. Then you've got the annual maintenance of that server. Then you've got to update the hardware and the software. Then you've got to look at the power, the cooling, and even the headcount at maintaining this, right? So we did this in with one of our customers, and it came to nearly $2 million. $1,970,000 over a 5-year period they were spending on an internal file server. Now, we really dig deep with this customer. Obviously, a petabyte of data is a huge amount of data to store. So what we did was we offered them 4 different options. So this is all specific to Google on the cloud storage that you can see here. So you look at standard storage, you're basically paying 2 cents for every gig. Nearline storage, you're paying 1 cent. With cold line storage, you're paying half a cent for every gig. Now, when you look at the archive storage, it's 0.1 cents for every gigabyte that you store there. So look, let's do the math over 5 years, right? So you look at it with the one-off migration costs and the 5 years of storing 1 petabyte of data in the archive storage. It comes to $172,000. Now, this is where your 90% saving comes in. So what we're going to do now is we've talked about the costs, we've talked about the feature sets, the benefits of moving to a cloud solution. Now, Mike's going to actually show you how we migrate this data. So Mike, over to you.
Cheers, Sam. Yeah, so Sam makes that sound really easy and great. You know, I can save a couple of $1 million by moving to the cloud. But then the question is, you know, I've got all these servers on premise. How do I move that data into the cloud? That's where we come in. So Cloud End Migrate can be used to migrate from a whole bunch of different platforms, as you can see here, into, again, a number of different options on the cloud side. So where you're migrating to will probably depend on the nature of the data, and you can use Cloud End Migrate to migrate all different types of data as part of one project. So you could be moving personal user data that they're accessing every day. So the most likely candidate there is probably Google Drive, OneDrive on the Microsoft side, to shared drives for shared data, and potentially SharePoint sites for that type of data too. But then you've also got that kind of code line storage available that Sam mentioned just then. So if you've got archive data that doesn't necessarily need to be accessed regularly by end users, but you maybe have legal requirements to keep it, that's where cloud storage becomes a perfect candidate. So here we'll run through how to use Cloud End Migrate to migrate from a local file system into Google Cloud Storage. So the first thing you'll do will be to select the source platform. So in this case, we go in file system. So you can use this to migrate any data that's stored in an NTFS file system, as long as you're running Cloud End Migrate local. So that's using our self-hosted version. You just configure it like this. So there's a few different options. We come into where you actually add the paths later as part of the user list. So you've got the option to resolve email addresses, so that can connect to Active Directory from your local Windows system to resolve email addresses and then apply the same permissions in the destination. So if you're migrating into Google Cloud Storage or Azure Storage, we can even maintain the permissions there. And then when you come to restore that data, the permissions can be reapplied. So you retain the data itself, but also the access control of that data as part of the migration. You can choose to include or exclude certain permissions as part of that. You can choose to migrate those permissions or not. So the default is to not include the sharing, but you can add that and also add notifications. So the next step is then to configure the Google Cloud Storage bucket or the Azure Storage bucket. They're very similar processes, but we'll concentrate on the Google Storage today. So if you're familiar with migrating into Workspace, or if you've used practically any other third-party Workspace application, you'll be familiar with the service accounts. So you can create a service account in the compute engine or the admin area. It will give you an email address and a private key file that you can generate. So it's very similar to migrating to cloud storage as to if you were to be migrating into Workspace. Then you just need to configure the bucket itself that you want to migrate into. So here's one I prepared earlier. You can see there's a cloud storage bucket available here, archive user. Within there, you can see it will have the logs and metadata and users post migration. And then the only other thing really is the encryption and the security side that you need to configure. So in here, you just need to create a keyring. You can copy the resource name from in here, and then you enter that in the advanced settings. So under encryption, the key name goes in here, so you just paste that straight in there. You can use your own key path if you wanted to. So this is using Google supplied keys. You've got the option to add your own key file path in here. There are options around the max file size, so you can limit the migration to certain size files. If you didn't want to, you know, as Sam mentioned there, that, you know, the more storage there is, even though the costs are tiny per gigabyte, the more data there is, the more it's going to cost. So you can limit the file sizes You can also compress objects as well as you migrate them. So that again will reduce the file size ultimately in GCS once it's migrated. That does mean that the migration takes longer because the compression is taking place as part of that migration. So once you've configured, the next step, if you hit next, it will just do a quick connection test. So that ensures that your encryption key is there and correct, and that you've configured the service account correctly. So all being well, you'll see all nice green ticks in there, and then you configure the actual objects that you want to migrate. So you see, because we're able to migrate, email data, personal files, and stuff like that. The user list, you'll see export and import name. That doesn't necessarily apply in this case, but they're more just used as identifiers. So if you're migrating personal data or shared data, you can just add a name as a tag, and then that'll be applied in the bucket. And then you just need to add your path to the files you want to migrate from. So this can be a local path like it is here. It can be a network mapped drive. It could be a network path to any location. So as long as it's a valid UNC path and you can access it locally, we can migrate it basically. So that includes a whole bunch of different platforms. As long as they can be accessed through Windows, we can migrate them. So you can just add users manually, as we've done in here, or you can bulk add objects. So you can add a CSV file if you had multiple different paths that you wanted to migrate from into multiple different buckets or different areas of the bucket. You can add a CSV file here, and there's a sample that you can download to get the headers and the format as well. Next step is the general configuration settings. So here you can do things like you can restrict the file range. So maybe that the date range. So maybe that you only have legal requirement to keep 1 year, 2 year of data that's been accessed or created within that period. So you can limit that again to reduce the amount of storage that you're using and reduce the cost. There's a bunch of options around documents here as well. So you could include or exclude specific file types, file or folder names. You can include or exclude, and this filter is used for that date range. So you can choose either modified or created. So next step, you'll be prompted to run an environment scan. This is optional, but we do recommend running a scan beforehand. So this connects to your source environment. Anything that you've selected in your user list up there in step 3, it will connect and then run a report. So here in our demo example, you see we've just got a few files. We've got 8 files and 3 folders in there. It give you the size. It can give you permissions. So if you do have a lot of sharing permissions, it can highlight those, because the more permissions there are, the more API calls we have to make, the longer the migration is going to take. So this scan really gives you a good idea of what your data looks like in your source, that allows you to plan ahead, give you a decent time frame estimation for the migration, and also allows you to potentially even architect what it's going to look like in the destination. So maybe that you see certain users have got excessive amounts of data. You can potentially reduce that prior to the migration, reducing the time frame and also the storage used ultimately in the destination. So finally, the next step is just to hit go, really. You do have the option to schedule the migration. So particularly if you're running from an on-premise system, if that's active during work hours, maybe it's not the most healthy or new file server that you've got. If you can't really handle a constant migration running, you can choose to schedule it just perhaps overnight out of active hours, or you can just hit go and it will run the migration from here. So when it's in progress, you'll see you get full stats. So you get a general overview. You can drill down in here to get more detailed statistics. You get your export and import rate and the throughput. So you get a good idea of the current progress, how fast it's running, how long you can expect it to take ultimately. And then you get individual objects here, so users or paths in this case. So as the migration's in progress, you'll see these numbers start to tick up. So it runs in batches. So you'll see it'll export a batch of data, then import that batch, and then continue until it's completed everything. So you'll see once it's completed, you get a little pop-up. You can export the results. So in there, you get a full CSV file that lists everything that's been migrated, as well as an HTML overview report. You can drill down into the numbers by clicking in here as well, so you can see even item by item what's migrated. If anything does happen to fail, in the bucket here, once migration is complete, if you go into here and then into the blobs, this is where the data is stored. So you can access it and view it. You can download individual files, But as this is code line storage, generally it wouldn't be accessed by end users. If you did then need to restore certain part of the data, you can just flip this config, migrate from storage into another destination, and it can be accessed again by your log users. So that's cloud storage migration really as a quick overview. Back to you, Sam.
Well, thank you very much for that, Mike. As you can see, very simple, very fast and efficient way of moving your data. So what we're going to do is we're just going to recap everything that we've talked about. So number one, any finance people around, you probably guessed it, internal servers cost far more than utilizing a cloud server. Google spent last year £13 billion just upgrading their servers internally in the US alone. That is a huge amount of expenditure, and obviously when you look at it, it makes everything a lot more secure. More money, more feature sets, more security. Again, as this, everything's been hard to access remotely. Now, when you move your data into a cloud environment, your data is then able to access from anywhere you need, as long as you have internet connection. And as well as that, 90% we have saved for lots and lots of customers just by moving their data into a cloud environment and also giving them better functionality. So wrapping up this webinar, we will open up for any questions if anybody has any. You can direct them to myself. My email is there on screen. It's sam.winter@cloudm.io, and thank you very much for joining us.